First Samuel chapter 25 records the story of Nabal, Abigail, and David. Okay, it's a very interesting story. We know the story, most of us know the story. It's about this foolish man who marries this very beautiful and wise girl called Abigail. Okay, the man was called Nabal. Nabal means a fool, but, anyways, he marries this girl, Abigail, and then during that time, David was near the place where these people lived, where Nabal and Abigail lived. And at that time, David was fleeing from Saul. Okay, David and his men were fleeing from Saul. So at that time, when David was in the wilderness, he was around Nabal's servants who were taking care of Nabal's sheep. Nabal was a very rich man, he had a lot of cattle. And David and his servants were basically protecting Nabal's sheep, okay, from intruders, from other people. So they really, were doing good to Nabal by taking care of his sheep and his servants in the wilderness, okay. So there was a festive season, and David sent his servants to Nabal asking him for some kind of a gift, for which Nabal insults them and sends them away empty handed, saying that, I don't have, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse that I should give him anything? Okay. And then he just sends them away. So David's servants, they go back to David and they tell him what Nabal has said, and David gets furious. He wants to avenge himself, he wants to take revenge. So he basically tells his servants, why don't you all strap your sword? Let's go and make sure that there is no male left in Nabal's household. We're completely going to destroy him. So Nabal's wife was told by Nabal's servant about what has happened, about how David sent his servants for a gift, and how Nabal has hurled insults on David and his servants. Okay. When Abigail hears about this, what she does is, without telling her husband, she basically saddles a donkey and basically sends forth the gift that David was looking for from Nabal. And as she goes, she basically comes across David, who was actually coming towards her and Nabal's household to destroy them. Okay, so she goes towards David, and as she sees David, she kneels down and she says a few things to him. Okay, so some of the things that she says to him is, don't pay attention to Nabal, my husband, because his name means a fool, and foolishness goes with him. Okay, so that's the first thing she said. The second thing she does was, she actually gives him the gift that he was expecting from Nabal, that David was expecting from Nabal. The third thing is, if you can read the chapter, chapter 25 of First Samuel, you would see all this written. Okay. So the third thing she does is, she basically tells Nabal, um, tells David that Nabal will be repaid for his evil, but she asks David not to avenge himself. She basically asks David to let God take the revenge, and that David should not engage in avenging himself. Okay. And then she goes on to say that he will be blessed abundantly. Okay, that David will be blessed abundantly, with reference to, she basically uses the word, your kingdom will be an eternal kingdom. It will be a lasting dynasty. Okay. So she gives him eternal blessings. Okay. And while she's saying all this, she always adds this point that because he has not avenged himself, he's going to have a lasting dynasty. And she goes on to say, in verse 28, it says that, you will be blessed abundantly. And then she says that, that God will protect him from his enemies, that God will protect David from his enemies. Okay. Even though there will be people who will be pursuing David, she basically prophesies and says that, God will protect you from all your enemies. Okay. And then she says that your enemies will be, uh, you know, God will take care of your enemies. Okay. Which means that, she basically says your enemies' lives will be hurled as from a sling. Okay. So this is another thing she tells about David's enemies, the thing that they have to go through because they have been enemies of David. Okay. And then she goes on to say that, um, he, that if he doesn't avenge himself, then he would not have to feel guilty when God gives him success from all his enemies. Okay. She tells him, like, if you avenge yourself now, you will still have the guilty conscience when, even when God gives you success. Okay, so I don't want you to have that guilty conscience, so please do not avenge yourself, let God take your revenge. Okay, so these are all the things that Abigail tells David. Okay, as I was reading the story, it was like I always thought that, here in the story, there's Nabal, there's Abigail, and there's David. Okay, I always thought it was, David represented God, and Nabal and Abigail are the people, who are like common people like us, right? But as I was reading the story the other day, God was telling me that, you know, it was God is represented as Abigail in the story. Okay. So basically, here David represents us. Okay. When we are in conflict with someone, or, someone repaying evil for good, right? So here in this case, Nabal was repaying evil for good, right? To who? To David. So here David represents us if we are being repaid evil for good, okay? Or if someone is persecuting us, or if someone is being our enemies for nothing at all, right? So here we are represented by David, and Nabal is the people of the world who are being our enemies for no reason, okay? So when this happens, it's like Abigail is God Himself telling David, okay, I know you have been given evil for the good that you have done. I know that you protected my sheep, but I know that my husband is trying to repay you evil for good. But, when you look at all the points she says, like, he's a fool, so he will act foolishly, okay? So basically, this is like God telling us, don't expect too much from unbelievers, right? They are unbelievers, so they're going to act that way because they are blind, you know they cannot see what you see. Okay, so don't expect more from them, right? So that's the first point Abigail tells David. Nabal means a fool, so he's acting foolishly, right? So what do you expect from unbelievers, right? So basically, when God tells us this, we feel like, oh yes, that's right. Why are we expecting too much from people who do not know God, right? So that's the first point. The second point is she actually gives the gift that David was expecting from Nabal. Okay, so when we are not treated fairly, and when we are not given the things that we rightly deserve, God Himself gives it to us. That's the second point. Third point is that she tells him that he will have eternal blessings. You'll have a lasting dynasty. God is going to protect you because you haven't avenged yourself, and you will have your enemies will be repaid. Okay, your enemies will be repaid like Nabal. She says, like, if your enemies do not repent, they will have to go through the same thing that unbelievers go through, right? So this is another thing that she tells David, and the last thing she tells David is like, God is going to bless you here as well in the land of the living, even though you have eternal blessings because you did not avenge yourself. Okay, I will give you what you deserve from those unbelievers. I will give it to you. And on top of that, those people, if they do not repent and they still stay like unbelievers, they will repay what they have sowed. Okay. So I don't want you to have the guilty conscience that you avenged yourself without letting God avenge for you. Okay. So if you just think of Abigail as God Himself pleading with us to not repay evil for evil, but instead to repay good for evil, and to give space for God, because in Romans it says that, beloved, do not avenge yourselves, leave room for the wrath of God, right? So this is actually, it's beautifully depicted in this story. So I think this is what God has revealed to me the other day, and I really hope that this helps someone if you're being persecuted, if you have your enemies. This is directly like God pleading with us to not avenge ourselves. Thank you.